In the restaurant business, every detail counts. I always said that to my staff when they asked why I arrived at my establishments at 6 in the morning. I loved watching the city wake up, the first rays of sunlight painting the historic buildings of the French Quarter in shades of gold and pink. At times like this, I often thought about how far I'd gotten from that little apartment on the outskirts of New Orleans, where my childhood had been spent. Mr. Donovan, the fresh oysters have arrived. Chris Holland, my best friend since high school and manager of the Southern Pearl, greeted me at the service entrance. He always called me Mr. Donovan in front of the staff, even though we'd been friends for over 20 years. "How many cases?" I headed into the kitchen, putting on a white robe as I went. The smell of fresh baked goods already filled the room. Our bakers started work at 4 in the morning to make sure all the buns and croissants were fresh for breakfast. 6, just like you ordered. Also, the chef wanted to discuss the new fall menu. I nodded, running my finger along the stainless steel countertop. Cleanliness was something I never skimped on. All 3 of my restaurants were renowned not only for their cuisine, but also for their impeccable hygiene. "Tell Paul I'll be at his disposal in an hour. I want to check the accounting for yesterday first." My office, located on the 2nd floor of the Southern Pearl, was in perfect order. Vivian often teased me about my pedantry, but it was my attention to detail that had helped me build a successful business. I turned on my computer and pulled out my phone to text my wife. She was on set in Houston for the 3rd day. "Good morning, love. Hope you slept well. Don't forget to eat breakfast before the shoot." Vivian burst into my life 2 years ago when she came to a charity dinner at the Southern Pearl. She was dazzling in a navy blue dress that highlighted her blonde hair and blue eyes. I remember her stopping by the lobster tank and asking me if it was true that they live for 100 years each. At that moment, I was lost. My phone vibrated. "Love you, Bear. The shoot starts in an hour. I'm just about to get ready for breakfast. Miss you." I smiled, looking at our wedding photo on the table. We'd gotten married a year ago with a modest ceremony on the coast. My mother, Loretta, had been wary of Vivian at first, believing that models were too winded for a serious relationship. But gradually, Vivian charmed her too, especially with her involvement in my mother's charitable projects. "Mr. Donovan." Maria, our head hostess, knocked on the door. "A shipment of wine from California has arrived. There are discrepancies with the order." "On my way," I rose from the table. The day was gaining momentum. By noon, I had time to check all 3 restaurants, have a meeting with the chefs about the fall menu, and meet with a representative from the winery to sort out the shipment. Southern Pearl was my pride of place, a haute cuisine restaurant specializing in seafood. Café Orleans is a cozy place with traditional Louisiana cuisine, and Blues and Bourbon is a bar with live music and a great whiskey collection. "Reed," Chris walked into my office after the lunch rush, your mother called. "Asked me to remind you about Sunday lunch." I rubbed my eyes. The last few weeks had been particularly busy. We were preparing for the opening of the new wine cellar at the Southern Pearl. "Thanks, Chris. How was lunch?" "All the tables were taken. 2 couples especially praised the new sous chef and his shrimp and béarnaise sauce." I nodded. Hiring James as sous chef was a risky decision. The guy was only 25, but his passion for cooking reminded me of myself when I was younger. "Tell him my thanks, and have him drop off his ideas for the fall menu to me by tomorrow." That evening, while going through reports, I came across an old photo in my desk drawer, my parents standing in front of the small grocery store where my father had worked all his life. Now, with 3 successful restaurants, I've provided them with a decent old age, but they still live in the same modest house. "We're comfortable here, son," Dad says every time I suggest they move to a more upscale neighborhood. The phone vibrates again. A message from Vivian. "The shoot is dragging on. We'll have to stay in Houston for a couple more days. Sorry, honey. I promised to bring you a special gift." I replied that I understood. Her career was on the rise, and I was proud of her accomplishments. Sometimes, though, I missed those early months of our relationship when we could sit for hours at Blues and Bourbon listening to live music and making plans for the future. Around 9 p.m., I finally turned off the computer. Tomorrow was a big day ahead, a meeting with suppliers from the Gulf of Mexico. I was going to expand the seafood menu at the Southern Pearl. As I walked through the empty dining room, I stopped at the very lobster tank where I'd once talked to Vivian. Maybe she was right about their longevity. Either way, that chance encounter changed my life. Nighttime New Orleans greeted me with jazz tunes coming from the bars of the French Quarter. I got into my black Mercedes and drove home to the penthouse on St. Charles Avenue. The apartment greeted me with an unaccustomed silence. It was too empty without Vivian. On the kitchen table lay the silk shawl she'd forgotten, the light scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. I poured myself a glass of red wine from the same California delivery and stepped out onto the balcony. The lights of the city spread out beneath me like a scattering of jewels on black velvet. Somewhere out there, in that shimmering sea of lights, my story began, the story of a poor boy who dreamed of owning his own restaurant. Now I had everything: a successful business, a beautiful wife, respect in society. I took a sip of wine, savoring its rich bouquet. Life was beautiful. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my musings. It was my mother. "Reed, honey, are you home yet?" "Yes, Mom, I just got here." "I saw Vivian on TV today, in a commercial. She's so beautiful. When is she coming back?" "In a couple days. The filming got delayed." "Good. Don't forget Sunday dinner. I'll make your favorite blueberry pie." I smiled. Mom still treated me like a little boy, despite my 37 years in successful business. "Sure, Mom. I'll be there." This conversation reminded me of how important family is. Perhaps Vivian and I should consider having children. We'd never seriously discussed the subject. She'd always said it wasn't the time, that her career required full-time commitment. I finished my wine and went back to the apartment. I had an important meeting tomorrow and I needed to get some sleep. My last thought before going to bed was Vivian. I wonder what she's thinking right now in her Houston hotel. Does she know how much I miss her? The morning coffee was hot and the mail was unexpectedly interesting. I was going through emails on my tablet, sitting at the kitchen island of our apartment, when I came across an invitation from the Houston Chamber of Commerce. They wanted me to speak at the Restaurant Innovation Conference in a week. "Share your experience in successfully growing a restaurant chain in an uncertain economic environment," the email said. I smiled, imagining Vivian's surprised face when I would show up unexpectedly in Houston. She'd just be there for a shoot. We could make reservations at some cozy restaurant, buy her favorite white peonies. I haven't seen her in 4 days and I miss her like hell. "Good morning, love. How did you sleep?" I texted, even though I knew it would be a while before I heard back. Vivian usually slept until 9 if the shoot started in the afternoon. The usual whirlwind of activity awaited me at the Southern Pearl. Chris greeted me with a concerned look. "Reed, we have a problem with the air conditioning system in the wine cellar. The temperature is up 3 degrees. Damn. I immediately headed downstairs. The wine collection was my special pride, with some bottles worth over $1,000. "Call the technicians and bring a thermometer. We need to check every section." We spent the next 2 hours monitoring the temperature and humidity. I checked my phone every now and then. There was still no response from Vivian. That wasn't like her. She usually answered within an hour of waking up. There was a stack of documents waiting for my signature in my office. Among them was a lease agreement for a new wine cellar. I mechanically looked through the papers until I came across an envelope with an airline logo on it. Strange, I didn't recall ordering tickets. Inside was a receipt in Vivian's name, a flight to Houston a month ago that she hadn't told me about. An uneasy feeling moved somewhere in my chest. I opened the calendar on my phone. That was the day Vivian had said she was going to a photo shoot in Baton Rouge. Maybe plans had changed at the last minute? But why hadn't she mentioned it? "Mr. Donovan," Maria knocked on the door. "Representatives from the winery have arrived." I tucked the receipt into my desk drawer. On my way, the meeting passed like a blur. I nodded, smiled, discussed the terms of delivery, but my thoughts kept returning to the ticket I'd found. After lunch, I couldn't take it anymore and called Vivian's modeling agency. "Good afternoon. May I speak to Aiden Frost?" "Just a moment," the receptionist answered. Aiden had been Vivian's personal assistant for the past year and a half. He handled her schedule and accompanied her to most of her shoots. "Reed, hi." Aiden's voice sounded a little strained. "Is something wrong?" "No, just wanted to clarify exactly when Vivian is coming back. We need to plan a family dinner. Oh, I thought she told you herself. Filming's been extended until the end of the week. Something in his tone made me wary. And that shoot in Baton Rouge a month ago? Remember which agency organized it? I want to book a photo shoot with them to promote the restaurant. The pause dragged on. Sorry, Reed. I'm being called on another line. Can we call later? In the evening, I decided to sort through the papers in the home office. Vivian sometimes used it when she worked on contracts. In the top drawer of the desk was a folder of papers: birth certificate, passport, insurance. I'd never checked her papers, but now something pushed me to open the folder. Inside, among other documents, I found a lease for an apartment in Houston, dated last year. Why would Vivian rent an apartment in another city? I flipped through the other papers: utility bills, unfamiliar bank statements. The phone rang. My mom. Reed, did you remember Sunday lunch? Of course not. I rubbed my temple. A migraine was starting to kick in. Will Vivian be flying in by Sunday? No, the shoot has been extended. Again? Something akin to disappointment slipped into my mother's voice. She's so rarely home lately. After the conversation, I stood on the balcony for a long time. The rain had intensified, turning the lights of the city into blurs. Somewhere out there in Houston was an apartment I knew nothing about. Somewhere out there was my wife's life, increasingly eluding me. I pulled out my phone and confirmed my attendance at the conference. What had started out as a romantic surprise had now turned into something else entirely. I needed to know the truth. At that moment, a text from Aiden came in. Reed, I'm sorry to write so late. I can't keep quiet anymore. We need to talk about Vivian, not over the phone. When you're in Houston, I'll tell you all about it. I stared at the phone screen, feeling the ground go from under my feet. Aiden, the man who knew my wife's every move, the man I trusted. What made him text this message right now? Houston greeted me with heat and humidity. I flew in early in the morning, the day before the conference, to have time to prepare for my presentation. The Hilton Americas Houston Hotel, where the event was being held, towered over the downtown business district like a glass monolith. Vivian was to stay at a different hotel, closer to the studio where the filming was taking place. Welcome, Mr. Donovan. The girl at the front desk smiled welcomingly. Your room is on the 24th floor. The conference room is on the 2nd floor, and check-in will begin at 8 tomorrow morning. In the room, the first thing I did was pull out my cell phone. There hadn't been any messages from Aiden since that evening. Dialed a message to Vivian. Good morning, love. Have a good shoot today. She replied almost immediately. Thanks, Bear. Shooting a new collection today. I'll be late. I looked at my watch. It was about 10 in the morning. There were 3 hours left before the performance rehearsal. Unfolding my laptop, I once again reviewed my presentation on the development of the restaurant business during the crisis. My thoughts kept returning to the documents I'd found, and Aiden's strange behavior. There was a knock on the door as room service brought the coffee I'd ordered. I walked to the panoramic window, looking out at the city below. Somewhere in here was that apartment. Somewhere here was my wife. And somewhere here were the answers to all my questions. Excuse me? Came a woman's voice from the hallway as I left the room. Do you happen to know where to print documents here? I turned around and saw a tall woman in an elegant white suit. Her dark hair was gathered in a bun and she was holding a clipboard in her hands. The business center is on the 1st floor, I answered. But the printer there breaks down a lot. At least that was the case on my last visit. Oh, great, she smiled ironically. And I thought it was only my hotels that had such tech problems. Your hotels? I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Scarlett Monroe, owner of the Ocean Breeze chain of boutique hotels in Miami. She held out her hand. And you must be at the conference too? Reed Donovan, New Orleans restaurants. I shook her hand. Going to talk about how to survive a recession without losing quality of service. Oh, I saw you on the program. You know, I was at your Southern Pearl last year. Terrific oysters. We walked down to the business center together. The printer, as I suspected, wasn't working. How about some coffee? Scarlett suggested. I have an hour before rehearsal, and I'd love to discuss your presentation. It's always interesting to hear how others handle personnel management. The lobby bar was quiet and cool. Scarlett proved to be an interesting conversationalist. She talked about her hotels with the same passion that I talked about my restaurants. "Does your wife mind traveling so often?" she asked when the conversation turned to work-life balance. "She travels a lot herself. She's a model." I took a sip of coffee. "By the way, she's here in Houston now too." "Oh, what a convenient coincidence. I guess you're planning a romantic dinner after the conference?" "Sort of." I tried to smile. "I want to surprise you." Scarlett looked at me carefully. "You know, you have a face like you're not really excited about this surprise." I was quiet for a moment. There was something disposing about this woman, some genuine interest. "Tell me, Scarlett, have you ever felt that someone you've known for years suddenly turns out to be completely different?" "Ah, that's the thing." She leaned back in her chair. "You know, I often see people living double lives in my hotels. Businessmen with 2 cell phones, women with different names. Houston is generally a city of secrets." At that moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Aiden. "I'm in the hotel lobby. Can we talk?" "Sorry, Scarlett, I have to go. Nice to meet you." "Hold on." She pulled out a business card. "If you ever want to talk or need help, call me. Sometimes it's easier to trust a stranger." Aiden was waiting for me in the far corner of the lobby. He looked pale and nervous. "Reed, I'm sorry about the other night. I should have said sooner." "Say what, Aiden?" "Vivian. She's not who she says she is. She'll be at La Maison restaurant on Westwood Street tonight. At 8 o'clock. Go there and you'll understand." What am I supposed to understand? But Aiden was already heading for the exit. "I'm sorry, I have to go. Just be there at 8. I went back to the room and lay on the bed, looking up at the ceiling. On the nightstand was Scarlett's business card, white with gold embossing. Strange how sometimes chance meetings happen just when you need them most. The clock showed 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There was plenty of time left until tonight. Time to rehearse the performance, time to doubt, time to dread what I might see in that restaurant. The phone rang again. Vivian. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm going to be late tonight." "Of course, love. Have a good shoot." I looked at the clock. It was 5 hours until 8. 5 hours until the moment that would probably change my entire life. I never thought I'd be watching my own wife. I reached La Maison restaurant an hour before the appointed time. The tie was stifling, even though the air conditioning in the cab was on full blast. I couldn't stop thinking about how just a week ago, Vivian and I had discussed our wedding anniversary plans. She wanted to go to Paris. La Maison was housed in an old mansion with stained glass windows. I chose a table in the back of the room, partially hidden by a decorative column. I ordered a whiskey, my hands trembling slightly as I raised my glass. The waiter brought a menu, but I didn't even open it. "Would you like to order anything?" he asked for the second time that evening. "Not yet, thank you." My voice sounded hoarse. I looked at my watch. It was 15 to 8. At 8 o'clock, the restaurant doors opened. Vivian entered, accompanied by a tall man in his 40s. She was wearing the same black Versace dress I'd given her for her birthday. The man held out a chair for her, the same gesture I always did on our dates. They sat 3 tables away from me. I could see their profiles. Vivian was laughing at something her date was saying. He took her hand, and she didn't pull away. A ring glittered on her finger, but not the one I'd put on her finger a year ago. The waiter brought them champagne. I heard a scrap of conversation. "Maybe next month we'll go to Aspen." Her companion spoke with a kind of carelessness that only very wealthy people have. My phone vibrated. A message from Scarlett. "How are you? If you need to talk, I'm in the hotel lobby bar." I didn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the way Vivian leaned toward her companion, the way her hand rested on his shoulder. So familiar, such an intimate gesture. After an hour, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the bill on the table and walked out the back door. In the hotel restroom, I felt sick. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My tie was off to the side. Sweat was beading on my forehead. Who was that man with the lost look? Could it be me? Going up to the room, I poured a whiskey from the minibar. My hands were shaking so badly that half of it spilled onto the carpet. The phone vibrated again. Vivian. "Shooting's running late, honey. I'll be very late." I tossed the phone on the bed and dialed Chris's number. Reed, is something wrong? I need your help. Can you check on something while I'm gone? Sure, anything. Come into my office. There's a folder of Vivian's files in the bottom drawer of my desk. The next morning, I missed my presentation at the conference. Said I was sick. Scarlett texted, I'm sorry you weren't there. Would you like to talk over lunch? We met at a little Italian restaurant near the hotel. I told her everything about the papers, about Aiden, about last night. She listened without interrupting. You know, she finally said, in my work, I often run into people who lead double lives, but it's usually men. What am I supposed to do, Scarlett? For starters, go home and sort things out. Do you have a friend who can help with the investigation? Chris. He's checking IDs right now. The phone rang. It was him. Reed, you won't believe what I found. On the plane back to New Orleans, I couldn't sleep. The scene from the restaurant was in front of me. Vivian in that very dress, her hand on another man's shoulder, an unfamiliar ring on her finger. Chris met me at the airport. I knew from the look on his face, the news was going to be bad. Let's go to the South Pearl, he said. It's safer to talk there. My office greeted me with the familiar smell of leather and coffee. A stack of papers lay on the desk, the result of Chris's night's work. His name is Grant Kingsley, Chris laid out the papers. Owner of a large construction company in Houston. And here's what I found. He held out a document to me, a marriage certificate. Vivian Ashworth and Grant Kingsley. The date was 3 months before she and I were married. I sank into the chair, feeling weak in my legs. That's not all. Chris pulled out other papers. The condo in Houston is registered to her and Kingsley. They share a bank account. And this? Photos. Vivian and Kingsley at some ski resort. They looked happy as she and I are in our pictures. What are you going to do? Chris asked. I looked out the window. It was starting to rain outside. The drops were slowly dripping down the glass like tears. We need to find Grant Kingsley. Reed, maybe we should go to the lawyers. No, I want to talk to him first. The phone vibrated. Scarlett, how are you? Call me if you need to talk. I dialed her number. Her voice was calm and confident. I have people I know in Houston. They can help me find information on Kingsley. Thank you, Scarlett. I don't know why you're helping me. Because no one deserves that kind of betrayal. That evening I returned to our apartment. Vivian's things were still in their places, her shampoo in the bathroom, her favorite cup in the kitchen, her shoes in the hallway. It was as if nothing had changed. Like the last 2 days had just been a nightmare. I pulled out a bottle of whiskey and stepped out onto the balcony. The city below was alive with people rushing home from work, evening lights on in restaurants, music playing somewhere. Just an ordinary evening in New Orleans. The phone vibrated again. A message from Vivian. Honey, I'll be back in 2 days. Love you. I stared at the screen, feeling everything inside clench with pain and rage. How many more lies? How many more fake loves? I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Scarlett called. I have Kingsley's office address and his personal cell phone number. Scarlett, thank you. Just promise me one thing, Reed. Don't do anything stupid. I won't. I just want to know the truth. The whole truth. In the morning, I didn't immediately realize where I was. It turned out I'd fallen asleep in my office. There was an empty bottle of whiskey on the desk, and the photos Chris had gotten were scattered nearby. Grant Kingsley smiled from each picture. A successful, confident man. Just as deluded as I was, a hot shower brought me back to my senses a little. As I shaved, I noticed the first gray on my temples. Had I really gotten gray these days? In the closet, picking out a shirt, I came across Vivian's dress that she'd forgotten to take to the dry cleaners. Her scent still lingered on the fabric. I slammed the closet door shut and slid to the floor, trying to deal with the panic coming on. The phone vibrated. Scarlett. Good morning. I sent you the information on Kingsley to your email. His office is in downtown Houston. From the appointment schedule I was able to get, he'll be there all day today. Thank you, Scarlett. I don't know how to thank you. Just be careful and keep me posted. At the Southern Pearl, I was met by a concerned Chris. He silently handed me a fresh coffee and a file folder. What did you find out? I took a sip. The coffee was just the way I like it. Strong, no sugar. Grant Kingsley, 41 years old, owner of Kingsley Construction Group. The company specializes in commercial real estate construction. Annual sales of about $100 million. I grinned. Reed, Chris perched on the edge of the table. Maybe we should go to the police. And tell them what? That my wife married someone else before she married me? That I'm so blind that I haven't noticed anything for 2 years? There was a knock at the door. Maria had brought some papers for me to sign. At the sight of my wrinkled appearance, she groaned, Mr. Donovan, are you ill? I'm fine, Maria. Just didn't get much sleep. When she left, Chris continued, I have a friend at the airline. He checked. Vivian's been flying to Houston at least once a month for the last 2 years. And those trips don't always coincide with official shoots. I opened my laptop and checked my email. Scarlett had sent a detailed dossier on Kingsley, office photos, home address, meeting schedule. How had she managed to get all that? Mr. Donovan, Maria again, your mother is on the phone. She says it's urgent. I picked up the phone. Mom? Reed, why aren't you answering the phone? I'm worried. You didn't show up for Sunday lunch. You didn't call me back. Damn it. I totally forgot about the family dinner. Sorry, Mom. A lot of work. Son, what's wrong? I can hear it in your voice. It's okay, Mom. I really am. Just tired. After the conversation, I sat looking out the window for a long time. The usual restaurant hustle and bustle was going on downstairs. Delivery men bringing in food, waiters preparing the room for dinner, the chef checking the freshness of the vegetables. Just an ordinary day. Only my life was falling apart. I booked you a flight to Houston for tomorrow, Chris said. The morning flight. Thanks. You're a true friend. You know, I always thought Vivian was too perfect. There's no such thing as a woman like that. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Scarlett had sent me. It buzzed. 1, 2, 3. Grant Kingsley speaking. His voice was exactly as it had been in the restaurant. Confident, with a slight huskiness. Mr. Kingsley, my name is Reed Donovan. We need to talk. A pause. I'm sorry, I don't recall. I'm Vivian's husband. One of the... The silence in the receiver became deafening. Then, come to my office tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. Tell security you're for a meeting on the Pearl project. He hung up. I felt weak and dizzy again. Reed, Chris put a hand on my shoulder. Maybe you shouldn't go alone. It's worth it. This is my case, and his. I spent the evening packing for the trip. The phone rang. Vivian. Honey, sorry I haven't called all day. Crazy shoot. That's okay. My voice sounded oddly calm. How's Houston? Hot. Miss you. I miss you too. Each word was hard to say, especially your sincerity. What do you mean? Nothing, love. Just tired. Good night. I turned off my phone and stepped out onto the balcony. New Orleans at night was buzzing below the music from the bars, the laughter of tourists, the clinking of the streetcar. A normal night in the city where I'd built my life, where I met the woman who ruined it all. The phone rang again. Scarlett. I heard you're flying out tomorrow. Yes, I'm meeting Kingsley at 10. Be careful, Reed. Men in this situation are capable of anything. Don't worry. I just want to talk. You know, she was quiet. My hotel in Miami has a great rooftop bar. When this is all over, come on over. Sometimes you just need to sit by the ocean and think about life. I smiled for the first time in days. Thank you, Scarlett. For everything. At night, I couldn't sleep again. I went over every moment with Vivian in my mind. Our first meeting, the first kiss, the proposal. Were there signs? Something I should have noticed? At 5 in the morning, I gave up and drove to the Southern Pearl. Helped the bakers with the morning's baking. It always calmed me down. The smell of fresh bread, the warmth of the ovens, the familiar motions. Boss. One of the bakers handed me a fresh croissant. You should rest. You don't look well. I took the croissant. Still warm, crisp. Vivian liked them for breakfast. I wondered if Grant bought her croissants too. Chris picked me up at 7 to take me to the airport. Call me when you land, he said goodbye. And be careful. On the plane, I tried to imagine how the meeting with Kingsley would go. What would I say to the man who unknowingly had shared a wife with me for the past 2 years? What would he say to me? Houston greeted me with the same stifling heat. I took a cab to the offices of Kingsley Construction Group, a state-of-the-art skyscraper. I have a meeting on the Pearl project, I told the security guard. He nodded and handed me a pass. 42nd floor. In the elevator, I scrutinized my reflection in the mirrored walls. This was not how I had envisioned this meeting. In fact, it wasn't how I'd imagined I'd ever meet my wife's other husband. The elevator doors opened. The reception area was decorated in a minimalist style: leather chairs, glass tables, black and white photos of skyscrapers on the walls. "Mr. Donovan?" The receptionist looked at me curiously. "Mr. Kingsley is expecting you." Grant Kingsley was standing at the panoramic window of his office when I entered. He looked even more imposing in person than he did in the photo's tall trim in an impeccably tailored gray suit. There were 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee and a carafe of water on the table. "Have a seat, Mr. Donovan." He pointed to a leather chair. His voice sounded calm, as if this was a normal business meeting. "Would you prefer an espresso or an Americano?" "Americano." I sat down, feeling a strange weakness in my legs. The office smelled of expensive perfume, the same perfume Vivian sometimes used. "How long has she been picking out your perfume?" Kingsley froze for a second, then slowly lowered himself into his chair. 2 years. Says I have no taste in such things." That's what she told me too. We looked at each other across the table, 2 men bound together by one woman. I noticed he looked tired too. "How did you know?" he asked, motioning a cup of coffee toward me. "Found the paperwork, airline ticket receipts, apartment rental agreement, and then I saw you 2 together at La Maison." "You were there?" He wrinkled his nose. "So you saw—" "Yes, in that dress I gave her." Kingsley stood up and walked over to the bar in the corner of the study, pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "I think we're going to need something stronger than coffee." I didn't object. The whiskey was expensive, aged, the same kind I was going to buy for our anniversary. "You know," Kingsley twirled the glass in his hands, "I met her 3 years ago at a fundraiser. She was raising money for a children's hospice. And me at my restaurant, also at a charity dinner. She knows how to impress, doesn't she?" He grinned bitterly. "Beautiful, intelligent, with a big heart. I fell in love at once." "So did I." "When did you get married?" "A year ago, in June." Kingsley stood up abruptly. "Shit. We'd been married for 3 months by then." He walked over to the shelving unit and pulled out a folder. Inside were pictures. Their wedding. Vivian in an elegant white dress, but a different one, not the one she'd married me in. The same happy smile, the same loving look. "And this is our trip to Aspen last winter." He held out another picture to me. "When she told me she had a shoot in Switzerland. She told me about a photo shoot in Milan." I took another sip of whiskey. "How did she do that? How did she manage to live 2 lives?" "Perfect planning. Always knew where we both were. Never got confused about the details." He refilled our glasses again. "And that assistant of hers, Aiden, was he helping her?" "Looks like it. He knew all our schedules." We were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the sun was setting, coloring the skyscrapers of Houston orange. Somewhere out there in that city was the apartment where Vivian was living her second life. "Have you checked the bank accounts?" I asked. "Yes." She was transferring money into offshore accounts, regularly, in small amounts. "From both of us." "Exactly." Kingsley rubbed his eyes. "I still love her, despite all of this." "Me too." The words came out on their own. "And I hate myself for it." My phone vibrated. A message from Scarlett. "How are you? Everything okay?" "Who's that?" Kingsley asked, noticing the change in my face. "A friend. She helped me find you." He nodded. "I have a friend on the police force too. He could—" "No." I shook my head. "Not yet, no. First, I want to understand." "Understand what, Donovan? That our wife is a professional liar? That we were both blind idiots?" The same pain I'd felt for the past few days came through in his voice. He stood up and walked over to the window. You know what she told me last night? That she wanted kids, a family, a house in the country. She said the same thing to me a week ago. We fell silent again. The phone rang in the waiting room, a muffled, distant sound. What are we going to do? I asked. Kingsley turned to me. A strange gleam appeared in his eyes. I have an idea, but we're going to have to work together to do it. He walked over to the table and pulled out his phone. Did Vivian tell you about the photo shoot in Miami in 2 weeks? No, she told me she was going to LA. And she told me she was flying to Miami for 3 days. See? She doesn't even realize we know about each other. I started to realize what he was getting at. Are you suggesting, surprise her, in Miami? Let her finally look us both in the eye. My phone vibrated again. This time it was Vivian calling. I showed the screen to Kingsley. Don't answer it, he said. Let things run their course. Bye. I disconnected the call. My hands were shaking. Do you have connections in Miami? Kingsley asked. Yes, a friend who owns the hotel. Great. We're going to need a safe place to. Conversation. He poured the whiskey again. We sat in his office until it was finally dark outside the window. Two husbands of the same woman, planning how to destroy the perfectly constructed world of lies she'd built. When I left the building, my phone had 5 missed calls from Vivian and a message. Honey, why aren't you answering? I'm worried. I dialed Scarlett's number. Reed, how'd it go? We need your help. More specifically, your hotel in Miami. In the cab on the way to the airport, I looked out at Houston at night and thought about how often Vivian had walked these streets with Grant, how they had dined at restaurants, gone to movies, made plans, just like she and I did in New Orleans. The phone rang again. Vivian. The screen flashed a picture of us together, us on the beach, happy, in love. I pressed decline and deleted the photo. At the airport, a text from Kingsley came through. I've booked a flight to Miami for next Friday. Will you book your friend's hotel room? Yes, she's making the arrangements. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks. And Donovan, thank you for coming today. I boarded the plane, feeling strangely empty. I'd spent the last 5 hours talking to a man who knew my wife as well as I did, who loved her as much, who had been deceived just as cruelly. In New Orleans, Chris met me. How'd it go? Pour me a drink, friend. And I'll tell you how my wife's other husband and I plan to meet in Miami. The next 2 weeks turned into a strange game of normalcy. I continued running restaurants, holding meetings, tasting new dishes. Vivian called every day, talking about the shoot in Houston, about plans for the future. Every word she said now sounded fake. Every intonation seemed rehearsed. Honey, I miss you so much, she was saying. It's only a few days until Los Angeles, and then I'm coming home. Los Angeles, not Miami. I wonder how she was explaining her absence from Houston to Grant. The Southern Pearl was where I spent most of my time now. Work helped me not to think. Chris watched me anxiously, but said nothing. Boss. Maria brought in the morning mail. The new menu samples from the print shop have arrived. I absent-mindedly flipped through the glossy pages. All the dishes, all the prices, all the descriptions. I knew them by heart. This was my life before. Before what? Before I learned the truth? Or before I met Vivian? I dialed Scarlett's number. She answered after the first beep. Reed, I was just about to call you. The suite is booked in both names. Security has been alerted. The rooftop restaurant will have a private room. Thank you, Scarlett. I don't know how... Don't. Just remember, whatever happens on Friday, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. Just the end of my marriage. The end of trust. The end of everything I'd believed in for the past 2 years. That evening, I sat in the empty lounge of the Southern Pearl, the place where I'd once first seen Vivian. Waiters were wiping glasses. The bartender was preparing ice for tomorrow. Just an ordinary evening. Will you stop torturing yourself? Chris set a glass of whiskey in front of me. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. I'm fine. No, you're not fine. You're preparing for something scary, and it's destroying you. I looked at my friend. How many times had he been there for me in difficult moments? When my father died, when my first restaurant was on the verge of bankruptcy, when... It was starting to rain outside the window, a rare occurrence for this time of year. Droplets dripped down the glass, blurring the lights of the street. My phone rang. Vivian. Honey, are you home yet? No, at the restaurant. Don't stay out too late, and don't forget to eat. The concern in her voice sounded so genuine that for a second I almost believed it. Almost forgot about Grant, about the apartment in Houston, about the double life. Of course, darling. How was your day? Tired. Last day of filming tomorrow, then straight to LA. For how many days? 3. I'll be back Monday. I wrote down every detail of her lies. Every word. Every made-up meeting. Every non-existent flight. After the conversation came a text from Grant. Just talked to her. Said she's flying to Miami Thursday night. Got an itinerary? Yes. Flight AA 218, arriving at 9 p.m. I opened my laptop and booked an earlier flight. Need to be in place early. Need to get everything ready. Scarlett sent pictures of the suite. Huge windows overlooking the ocean. Whitewashed walls. Minimalist interior. Perfect place for dramatic events, she wrote. That night, I returned to our apartment for the first time in 2 weeks. There were signs of Vivian's presence everywhere. Her books on the bedside table, hand cream in the bathroom, a hair clip on the dressing table. It was as if she had just stepped out for a minute and was about to return. I pulled out my suitcase and started packing. I chose a dark blue suit for the meeting. Vivian had said it made me look like a movie star. I wondered if she'd said the same thing to Grant. The phone vibrated again. Aiden this time. Mr. Donovan, Reed, I know you know everything. And I know about Miami. Have you been following us? No, it's just, I can't be a part of this anymore. She doesn't know I told you. Why did you do it, Aiden? A pause. Because I was tired of lying, tired of being an accessory. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. How many nights had I spent here, holding Vivian in my arms, believing every word she said, every promise she made? In the morning, my mother called. Reed, you've been kind of weird lately. What's going on? I'm fine, Mom, just work. Where's Vivian? I haven't seen her in a while. On a business trip. Again? Son, maybe. Mom, I'm sorry, I gotta go. Meeting. An envelope from Grant was waiting for me at the Southern Pearl. Copies of bank statements, proof of transfers, photos. Might come in handy, he wrote. I was sitting in my office, poring over the documents, when a text came in from Scarlett. How are you? Holding up? Trying. You know what helps you get over betrayal? Remembering that you're not alone. You have friends. Friends. Chris, who brings me coffee every day and makes sure I eat. Scarlett, who organized everything in Miami. Even Grant, the man I was supposed to hate but with whom I shared a common pain. In the evening, I checked my ticket reservations, my hotel reservations, confirmed my restaurant reservations. Everything was ready. All that was left was to wait. Mr. Donovan, Maria peeked into the office. A shipment of wine from California has arrived. I need your signature. I mechanically signed the paperwork. Once it had been important, the wines, the menu, the suppliers. It had once been my life. My phone vibrated. Vivian had sent selfies from some shoot. Smiling, beautiful, a stranger. Miss you, Bear. Just a little while longer. Yeah, it's just a little while away. Friday, Miami. Until the lie was over. I dialed Grant's number. All set? Yes. Meet me in the hotel lobby at 7 p.m. Friday night. Do you think she suspects anything? No. She's too confident in her perfect lie. Before going to bed, I stepped out onto the balcony. New Orleans was living its usual nightlife. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. Somewhere out there, in another city, another man was now looking at the lights of Houston and thinking about the same woman. Friday was approaching inexorably. As Scarlett used to say, it's not the end of the world, just the end of lies. Miami greeted me with humid heat, and the sun reflecting in endless glass facades. The Ocean Breeze Hotel towered above the shoreline 30 stories of glass and white stone. Scarlett was waiting for me in the lobby, elegant in a light-colored suit. Reed, she held out her hand. You look tired. Been up all night. Come on, I'll show you the suite. Grant arrives in 2 hours. The suite was on the 28th floor. The panoramic windows overlooked the ocean, the vast blue merging with the horizon. The interior was in light colors, minimalist and elegant. "There's a separate living room here." Scarlett led me around the room. "You'll be able to talk quietly," I grinned. Calm. How could a conversation with a woman who'd been leading two husbands around by the nose for 2 years be calm? "Her flight arrives at 9 p.m. I pulled out my phone, checking messages. Aiden confirmed she flew out of Houston. And what did she tell you? That she's flying in from Los Angeles, after a photo shoot for a magazine that never happened. Scarlett sat down on the edge of the couch. "You know, in all my years in the hotel business, I've seen a lot of stories about double lives. But one like this." My phone vibrated. A message from Vivian. "Honey, I'll see you Monday. Love you." I showed the message to Scarlett. She doesn't even know I'm here. What did she text Grant? That she's flying in tonight, for a romantic weekend. There was a knock on the door. Room service brought coffee and light snacks. I couldn't eat. My stomach twisted from the exertion. "Have some coffee at least." Scarlett poured me a cup. "It's going to be a long day." At 7 p.m., Grant appeared in the lobby. Impeccable suit, confident gait. No one would have guessed he had the same storm inside him as I did. "Donovan." He shook my hand. "Ready?" We went up to the suite. Grant looked around the room, lingering at the window. "It's a beautiful view. Vivian and I were going to buy a condo here." She was telling me about a house in the suburbs of New Orleans. We looked at each other and grinned unhappily. How many more plans was she making with each of us? Scarlett brought out a folder of documents. "These are copies of everything we have. Bank statements, marriage certificates, photos." "Thank you." Grant took the folder. "I'm not sure we'll need it, though. Just the two of us in the same room will suffice." Time stretched agonizingly slow. We sat in the suite's living room, barely speaking. Grant was checking email on his phone. I was looking out at the ocean. Scarlett tactfully withdrew, saying she'd be in her office. At 8:30, a text came in from Aiden. "They've landed." She took a cab. "They?" Grant interjected. "Apparently Aiden is flying with her. The usual." Another half hour passed in anxious waiting. I stood up and walked over to the bar and poured myself a whiskey. My hands were trembling slightly. "Pour me one too," Grant said. We stood at the window, looking out at the Miami night skyline. Somewhere out there in the traffic was the woman who had ruined our lives. At 9:20, the room phone rang. "Miss Ashworth is coming up in the elevator," the concierge announced. Grant finished his whiskey in one gulp. I undid the top button of my shirt. Suddenly, it was hard to breathe. There was a knock on the door. We looked at each other. Grant nodded. "Go ahead." I opened the door. Vivian stood on the doorstep, beautiful as ever. White dress, her favorite shoes, her hair in an elegant bun. "Surpr..." A smile froze on her face when she saw me. "Reed, what are you?" "Come in, darling." I stepped aside. "They're waiting for you." She took a step into the room and froze. Grant stood in the middle of the living room holding a file folder. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "Yes, honey." Grant opened the folder. "Have a seat. We need to talk." She sank into the chair, looking back and forth at me and Grant. Her hands shook as she tried to get her cell phone out of her purse. "Don't bother calling Aiden," I said. "He won't cover for your lies anymore." "I can explain." "Really?" Grant put the pictures in front of her. "Explain why you married me 3 months before you married Reed? Explain where the money from our accounts went? Explain why you lied to both of us every day for 2 years?" She was silent, looking at the pictures. Some showed her with me in New Orleans, others with Grant in Houston. 2 lives, 2 husbands, 2 versions of the truth. "I loved you both," she finally said. "Loved you?" I didn't recognize my voice. "Love isn't built on lies, Vivian. You don't understand." She stood up, trying to walk toward me. "Reed, please." "Sit down." Grant's voice sounded tired. "And just tell the truth, for once in your life." She sank back into the chair. A tear rolled down her cheek, smearing her mascara. "I met Grant first," she began quietly. "He was everything I dreamed of. Successful, handsome, in love with me. We were married 6 months later. She looked at me. And then I came to your restaurant, Reed. You were different, passionate, driven, real. I couldn't resist. And decided to have it all at once? Grant grinned bitterly. I didn't plan to. It just happened. And then it was too late to make a change. Too late? I walked over to the window. 2 years, Vivian. 2 years you lived a double life. Planned a future with both of them. Took money from both of them. Money? She threw her head up. You think this is about money? What else is it about? Grant tossed bank statements on the table. $1 million in offshore accounts. From both of us. She covered her face with her hands. I was confused. I didn't mean to hurt either of you. But you did, I turned to her. You ruined everything. There was a quiet knock on the door. Scarlett. Excuse me. Aiden's downstairs. He wants to come up. Let him come up, Grant said. Let everyone see the truth. Aiden came in a few minutes later. He looked exhausted. I'm sorry, he said, looking at Vivian. I couldn't be a part of this anymore. You betrayed me, she whispered. No, Vivian, I didn't. You're the one who betrayed all of us. We sat in that room for another 2 hours. Vivian talked about how she'd coordinated her mission trips, how she'd made up stories for each of us, how Aiden had helped her maintain those lies. So now what? She asked finally. Now? Grant stood up. Now you're free. From both of us. I watched her gather her purse with trembling hands, as she corrected her makeup, trying to maintain her dignity, as she looked back at both of us one last time. I'm really sorry, she said before walking out. The door closed. A heavy silence hung in the room. Shall we have a drink? Grant suggested. Cheers. Dawn over Miami colored the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'd stayed up all night sitting on the suite's balcony watching the nighttime city slowly awaken to life. The phone was silent. Vivian hadn't tried to contact me or Grant. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she was left without words. There was a quiet knock on the door. The room service had brought coffee. I'd ordered it an hour ago when I realized sleep wasn't coming. Grant was asleep in the next room. After Vivian left, we'd sat up until 3 in the morning, finishing our whiskeys and sharing stories about how she'd come into our lives. Good morning. Grant came out of his room, impeccably dressed as if this sleepless night hadn't happened. Would you like some company for breakfast? Just coffee, I guess. I handed him a cup. Can't think about food. We stood at the panoramic window, looking out at the waking city. Down on the beach, the first joggers and early swimmers were already showing up. You know, Grant sipped his coffee, I always thought that if I found out about the affair, I'd be furious. But now all I feel is emptiness. And relief, I added. A strange, painful relief. He nodded. We understood each other without words. Two people bound together by shared pain and shared release. There was another knock on the door. This time it was Scarlett. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you? We'll live, I tried to smile. The beach is already open. She walked over to the window. Why don't you take a walk? They say the morning air cures all wounds. We walked downstairs. Miami Beach was still relatively empty. Only the occasional tourist spread out their towels on lounge chairs. The ocean was noisy, rolling waves onto the white sand. It's funny, Grant said as we walked along the water's edge. She always said she loved the ocean. She was afraid of the waves. And she didn't like to sunbathe, I added, always hiding under an umbrella. But she always looked like a mermaid in pictures. We grinned. Vivian was a master at creating illusions, for pictures, for us, for the world. Where do you think she is now? I asked. Probably on an airplane by now, flying off somewhere to start a new life. A new lie. We reached the small pier. The sun was rising higher and higher, coloring the water with golden tones. You know what's weird? Grant leaned on the railing. I don't feel any hatred for you, although I should. Likewise, I stood next to him. We were both just pieces in her game. Like chess two kings, she played by her own rules. We were silent for a moment, looking out at the horizon. Seagulls circled over the water, their cries mingling with the sound of the waves. What will you do next? Grant asked. Go back to New Orleans. I've got restaurants, a job. Life goes on. And I'll probably sell the house in Houston. Too many memories. He held out his hand to me. Good luck to you, Donovan. I hope we don't meet again under these circumstances. I shook his hand. It was a strange feeling, saying goodbye to a man who under other circumstances I might have considered a friend. Grant left, and I stayed on the pier. The sun was already beating down, but I didn't want to leave. Here, by the ocean, everything that had happened seemed distant, as if it were a story that had happened to someone else. Would you like some breakfast? Scarlett's voice brought me out of my reverie. My restaurant makes a great breakfast overlooking the ocean. I turned around. She was standing on the pier, the wind playing with her dark hair. She looked especially beautiful in the morning light, natural, real, not like Vivian with her perfect but fake beauty. I'd love to, I replied. Only if you'll keep me company. The restaurant was located on the roof of the hotel. White tablecloths fluttered in the light breeze. Waiters glided silently between tables. Do you often help strangers? I asked. Only to those who deserve it, she smiled. And you're not a stranger, Reed, not after all this. Breakfast dragged on until noon. We talked about everything, the restaurant business, Miami, life. Not once did we mention Vivian. When are you going back to New Orleans? Scarlett asked. Tonight. Gotta get back to work. You know, she pulled out a business card. I'm often in New Orleans on business. Maybe next time we could have dinner at your restaurant? I took the business card, feeling lighter on my soul for the first time in a long time. I'd love to. I just got a new chef. Need a professional's opinion. We walked down to the lobby. Scarlett had a meeting to go to and I had to get ready for the airport. Thank you, I said, for everything. You're welcome, she smiled. I walked out of the hotel and headed toward the ocean again. I needed to kill time before my evening flight, and for some reason I didn't feel like sitting in my room. My phone vibrated, a message from Chris. How are you? Should I pick you up at the airport? Yeah, and have a nice bottle of whiskey ready. I've got a story to tell.